China was like an anchor on us. China was killing us with unfair trade deals.
US President Donald Trump ramping up the pressure against China while the two biggest economies are locked in a trade dispute. What is the way forward? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is the... This week started with jitters on financial markets around the world after the United States announced new tariffs against Chinese products. The US branding one of its critical trade partners a currency manipulator is changing the nature of a dispute that began with tariffs and now involves China's currency. CGTN's Owen Fairclough has more.
The dog days of August are traditionally choppy for financial markets. Now the US and China have increased the turbulence after opening a new front in their trade war. The US categorized China a currency manipulator after the UN plunged against the dollar, then strengthened after Beijing stepped in to stabilize it. But if investors breathed a sigh of relief, President Trump is maintaining the pressure on China to change what he calls unfair trade practices.
Somebody had to do this with China because they were taking hundreds of billions of dollars a year out of the United States, and somebody had to make a stand.
Trump claimed China lowered the yuan to offset the impact of the hefty tariffs imposed by his administration to make exports cheaper. But China's central bank insists market forces, including the turmoil caused by the trade war, were to blame.
It is totally wrong for the U.S. Treasury Department to designate China as a currency manipulator. This neither meets basics of economics nor the quantitative criteria for so-called currency manipulators set by the U.S. Treasury, so we are firmly against it.
Indeed, as recently as May, the Treasury Department said China wasn't a currency manipulator, partly because it hadn't intervened persistently in the foreign exchange market. But that accusation is now at the center of their trade dispute, and the US wants the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to intervene. And that's where this currency crisis starts to get complicated. The IMF includes China in what's called a basket of global currencies used to prop up member states if they run into trouble, and by extension, the global financial system. And yet the US wants the IMF to act as some kind of referee and decide whether China has manipulated its currency and apply some kind of remedial action if that's the case. But it's not clear what that would be. Despite this rapidly escalating crisis, the Trump administration still plans to host a Chinese delegation for talks in September, just as Washington plans to impose more tariffs that would effectively tax virtually all of China's exports to the US. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.